3, 2, 1.
Drivers, start your engines!
Let's go, Brandon!
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We must increase vaccinations among the unvaccinated with new vaccination requirements.
It's not going to work. We have other countries with much higher rates of vaccination, and they're seeing record surges of COVID because that's what viruses do.
Many of us are frustrated with the nearly 80 million Americans who are still not vaccinated.
Their freedom. I want my freedom to live.
Rest in peace, Wheezy.
We are going to need the people to engage in age-old American tradition of simply saying, no, I'm not going to comply. Now, what are you going to do about it?
It never stops. They want things to get worse because they want you to suffer so that they can grandstand on your suffering and push for even more control.
They have criminalized freedom. They've made getting sick illegal.
This isn't about COVID any more than the Patriot Act was about Al-Qaeda. It's about government asserting more control over your lives, your rights, your properties, and in this case, your bodily autonomy.
It has a lot of vaccinated people alarmed because of the power grab that's involved.
Enough is enough. We better change our tune and start resisting.
Government makes up less than 1% of the population. If even 5 or 10% of Americans simply refuse to comply, all of this goes away.
Absolutely, this is the hill worth dying on.
We haven't given the statutory authority to any agency to do this kind of thing.
There is no such thing as government power. There's only what we are willing to comply to.
We're in a tough stretch, and it could last for a while.
That's what this has always been about. It's never about what they say it is. It's about controlling you. And it ends when we decide to end it.
This BS is going to stop.
It's time for us to wake up.
There's only one way to fight back against this, and it's mass non-compliance.
This is the most important thing to fight against.
You can help stop this. You are the power.
There's nothing, not a single thing we're unable to do if we do it together.
And I'm fucking livid that we are stuck in the timeline where Alex Jones is right. Kind of worse.
Oh no! Oh, okay, no.
Why aren't the Amish afraid of COVID? Because they don't have TVs.
As I said, democracy is a system that reinforces authoritarian ideals.
I hope I don't get canceled. Talk to you.
Being a victim of a tragedy doesn't make you an expert in public policy.
Well, I mean, AOC is a drama queen and she's full of shit.
Remember, they lost the Afghan war 10 years ago.
You brought a freaking guillotine.
They said, you don't get to tell us no, we're the state health department, and I said, hell no.
It wasn't making Christianity better, it was making rock worse.
What the fuck do you have on your face, Olivia?
You want to make the world a better place? Have some babies and raise them to not be stupid.
I remember thinking, man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, activists, shitposters, and people of the internet, thank you for tuning in to another episode of O'Donnell for Liberty. As always, I'm your host, Justin. Before we get started, just remember, whatever platform you listen on, whether YouTube Live, Odyssey, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, or over on the air at lrn.fm, you can help grow the show by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. If you enjoy the content we're producing, you can join the production team by visiting patreon.com/O'Donnell for Liberty. Again, that's patreon.com/O'Donnell, the number 4, Liberty. If you want to keep in touch between shows, follow me on social media and join our community Discord channel where you can chat with fans about the show at any time. All these links can be found in the description of the video or podcast that you're listening to, as well as on o'donnellforliberty.com. So check the description for that link and make sure you give it a visit today. First and foremost, a shout out to Dan Smots at the System Is Down podcast for the production of that incredibly powerful anti-mandate ad you saw at the beginning of the video program if you're watching on YouTube or Odyssey. And you should most definitely check out his show at thesystemisdown.tv. Also, make sure you visit snackswag.com to get all your favorite Liberty merch, including some awesome new hoodies in the collection, just in time for colder weather creeping in. And if you're one of those crazy New Hampshire activists who's real mad at the governor, the brand new Impeach Sununu shirt. Everybody knows power's got to go. So again, visit snackswag.com to get your favorite Liberty merch today. Tonight, we're going to be talking about legislative path to liberty and how libertarians in the legislature can positively impact human freedom in real time and make real progress today. We're going to take questions, so make sure you hit that like button, leave some comments in chat, and tell us what you think. And give a warm welcome to tonight's guest, New Hampshire State Representative Melissa Blasek. Melissa, thank you for joining the show tonight. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So you're a freshman representative in the New Hampshire State House, and as you described yourself to me, the crazy radical freshman who's making waves and getting stuff done. What was it that possessed you at first to run for the State House? I know people in New Hampshire, we have a really thriving activism scene, an activism community, and an activism culture here in New Hampshire where everyone's involved in politics. There's a joke that every 4 years you can't get a breakfast in Manchester without running into a presidential candidate. And it's some of the most informed people politically in the country. Even the people who are lackadaisical and don't care know what's going on. But what possessed you to take that leap and run for an elected office that's essentially unpaid part-time job and a lot of stress and dealing with assholes like me that come to your committee to tell you what we think about what you're doing?
Well, I can tell you, 2 years ago, like now, if you would have said I was going to run for office, it would have said that you had lost your mind. I'm not joking. I literally did not decide to run for office until the week before the filing deadline in June of 2020. And that is, and the reason why I ran is at the time I was already on the board of Reopen New Hampshire, and I ran for a mission. I ran to work to end the state of emergency, to restore law and order to the state of New Hampshire, and to work on the COVID fascism issue.
And last year, your first year in the State House, you had how many? 10 pieces of legislation you had sponsored or co-sponsored? And
a lot. I did co-sponsor quite a bit. I basically co-sponsored all of the state of emergency reform bills, which we had about 15 of those. I don't think I was on every single one of them, but I was on quite a few, especially for freshmen. And I did sponsor myself the resolution to end the state of emergency, as well as I attempted to ban mask mandates in towns and cities. And what else did I do? I had another bill, I can't remember, but that I prime sponsored. But yes, I co-sponsored all the state of emergency reform bills. That was the other reason why I ran for office. You have to change the law so that this couldn't happen again. I don't think any of us realized how incredibly damaging our state of emergency laws could be.
yeah, I know a lot of libertarians take the mentality of like the conversation ends when somebody says there ought to be a law because they're just wrong. But we saw and we came to grip with the reality of there wasn't a law preventing the governor from doing something, so he just went and did it. And so it was really important that people like yourself got into office to create a law that stopped the government from...
Well, the problem was there was a law. There was a law that gave him unlimited authority with no oversight during a state of emergency. So, yeah, that needed to be changed and reformed. We did make a lot of headway last year with changing and reforming the state of emergency law. And we have an early expedited bill this year that we think will sort of solidify the final changes to give... the last little bit gives a lot more oversight from the legislature, because the legislature doesn't cease to exist during the state of emergency, or should not.
Right. I mean, you see executives all over the country acting like legislators don't exist and like acting like they just have supreme authority. In the ad that Dan had put together that we ran before, like Thomas Massey talking about, we have not created any statutory authority for the executive branch to be doing these things, and they're just doing them anyways.
Right. But in New Hampshire, that's part of what makes our state so great, is out of the state of emergency, we actually have the weakest governor in the state. He has very little authority. And I just mean a governor, generally speaking. I know people have their certain particular feelings about Governor Sununu, but I mean, governors, generally speaking, because the executive branch is divided into the executive council, and the governor really removes a lot of unlimited authority. And the legislature is, in a lot of ways, the most powerful branch of government in the state of New Hampshire, but not in a state of emergency. So we work on that.
Right, and it is, the reality does set in that it is a part-time legislature. The legislature has rules about what it can discuss and when bills have to be submitted. You can't do reactionary legislation in New Hampshire. I consider that a really good thing. Like, if there's a school shooting or something that happens in the middle of the winter, the New Hampshire legislature can't just immediately put down a bill and say we're voting on gun control. It's basically a cool down period. You have to wait until the next session to consider a bill on something that happened in the middle of the session.
Right. There are ways that you can call a special session. It has certainly been done. It's incredibly difficult to do. And there has to be a lot of consensus to get it done.
Yeah. So this year, I looked over some of the bills that you are co-sponsoring this year. And while there are some that are related to COVID and related to the mandates, and it seems like you kind of branched out. You put your name on some bills that don't necessarily just have to do with the lockdowns and the COVID tyranny and the fascist regime we're seeing, and addressing other aspects of liberty and libertarianism and where the government has overstepped. Of the bills that you've, I'm looking at, there's 13 that you've put your name on here. There's one that you're the prime sponsor on. You wrote, you submitted, and other people signed on to. And that, what I'm looking at is that the relative to the taking of real property by eminent domain?
Yes. Technically, it's still a state of emergency bill. It's the one part of the law that we did not get to fixing last year. And there is another law that a lot of people don't know about, RSA 4:46, that allows the governor during the state of emergency to seize private property.
Which is, it's wild to think about, because when I think about eminent domain in New Hampshire, I always think back to the Kelo case in Connecticut and the Little Pink House case, and Justice Souter being the tie-breaking vote to allow this state to use eminent domain for private purposes. And what the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire did, what John Babiarz and the old school people of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire did in response to that, because Justice Souter owned property in New Hampshire. So they filed an eminent domain claim on his ranch in New Hampshire to build the Lost Liberty Hotel for private gain. And immediately they called a special session and passed a constitutional amendment to ban that in New Hampshire.
I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's
right.
That's
but
fantastic.
I think it got seen so very overlooked as to how expansive eminent domain was, how expansive the seizure of private property by the state could be. And then we had things like the eviction moratorium, the shutting down of private businesses, the utilization of schools and college campuses to house National Guard and vaccination sites, and even the utilization of New Hampshire Motor Speedway as a government site for the vaccination. Whether or not the owners consented to it or not, it creates a fine line.
Circumstance they did, but I mean, we have to think about this. We've made such progress with liberty in New Hampshire, and essentially we lost it all with COVID in one fell swoop, right? And all these issues that are so important to libertarians, but just honestly the general average person in New Hampshire. We realized that the state of emergency laws just take away all of those restraints from government, right?
Right. Yeah. I likened, and I got in trouble, and people got really mad at me when I made a comment suggesting that the eviction moratorium amounted to the single largest seizure of private property in American history.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I completely agree.
It was the federal and state governments telling private property owners they no longer had control of their own private property. They couldn't evict somebody for not paying rent. They still had to pay the property taxes. They still had to pay the common utilities. They still had to upkeep the building, but their tenants were allowed to stay there with absolutely no consideration to the owners. And it was a seizure of private property. How far is your bill going? How far is your bill intended to go to stop that kind of stuff?
I personally feel that the entire law could be repealed. I believe that in a true emergency, if there was really a desperate situation that people do the right thing because they want to. They've attempted to repeal this law in the past, and the argument was, what if there's a pandemic so bad the bodies are just building up in the streets and you have to seize the freezer trucks, the refrigeration trucks from the grocery store to haul the bodies off to the morgue? And I say in that case, I'm pretty sure they would just give you the trucks.
I don't think you're going to need to seize them. Yeah, I don't think in a true case you're not going to need to seize things, because we've seen spontaneous order happen. We've seen spontaneous order work, where people come together and work for what's best for them, and people take care of their communities before they want to take care of other communities. So if you're having an issue where, yes, there's a major outbreak and there's bodies in the streets because it's that bad, I don't think you're going to need to seize Market Basket's trucks. I think Market Basket's going to recognize that there's a problem that's affecting their business and take action to save the future of their business and their employees and their community.
I completely agree. However, a political reality is that this law will never be repealed, most likely. So I am making it incredibly expensive and incredibly complicated to ever use.
And that's fantastic. And we see things like with the shutdowns of private businesses, bars, restaurants that we had for near a year. It's a miracle many of them managed to stay open at all. Have any of them been compensated by the state for the orders that they were forced to shut down? Or is the state using loopholes like, oh, you had the opportunity to get a small business loan?
I wanted to file a bill. I had an idea to file a bill. Okay. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is something for the future. I got too overwhelmed with the vaccines issue, but I wanted to file a bill saying that if during a state of emergency, a governor shuts down a private business, you have to compensate them for lost income. The state must compensate them for lost income. Because, listen, it's a takings clause. You can't just take something from somebody, right? I would love to do something like that, because I don't see any reason why the state should ever. I mean, my argument against lockdowns at the very beginning was, let's hypothetically say that lockdowns are somehow scientifically effective in some way. If this was really some type of this really terrible, terrible pandemic, nobody's going to want to go see other people. People have self-preservation skills. We all don't want to die. And if a couple people do, well, I guess that's their problem.
Well, I think a lot of what that's going to come down to is the availability of accurate and timely information for people to make their own decisions and their own choices based on. Yeah. And we haven't had that because the government's been in the way, and the government's been at the lead of delivering misinformation and bad information to people, misinforming them. Yeah. And we've seen how a lot of people who just don't, a lot of libertarians who just didn't trust the government, there was a whole bunch of, there is no pandemic at the beginning. And then people started getting sick. Like, okay, there's a pandemic, but it's not as bad as they say. Okay, there's the pandemic. It might be as bad as they say, but the lockdowns aren't worth it. And finally coming around to, no, there was a pandemic, but it wasn't nearly as bad as they made it out to be. It was a bad seasonal flu. People got sick. And if you give people that information, allow them to make their own decisions. Hell, I remember when I was a kid, we had chickenpox parties. One kid comes home from school with chickenpox, parents on the phone organizing a sleepover for everyone in the neighborhood to go get the chickenpox because you'd get immune to it right then.
Parents still do that, just under the radar, but yes, parents still do that. Now, I completely agree. You want to shock a group of Democrats, you get on the House floor and you say what I said, which is that it is not the government's job to protect people's health and safety. It is their job to inform and educate the public so that people can make the best decisions for themselves. And that literally elicited shocks, gasps.
Yeah. Some of your other bills that you did sponsor, I saw one that was primed by Rep. Leah Cushman. Leah's fantastic. She's a nurse. She works in the medical field full time. Which is to permit pharmacists to dispense the drug ivermectin by a means of standing order. Now, to your knowledge, the bill text is not available yet to us. But would that mean, even without a prescription, just go and be able to get it?
Yes, over the counter.
So the same as you can go to Tractor Supply and buy it, but actually getting the human formulated one instead of the horse-based?
Correct. So and there's another bill out there that's not specific to ivermectin, but that bans pharmacists from saying that they won't fill a drug that has a prescription. It's something about off-label medications. Basically, if there is a valid prescription for an off-label medication, the pharmacist has to fill it. They can't choose to practice medicine without a license, because that is essentially what they're doing when they say, "Oh no, I'm not filling it for that disease because I don't believe in that." Right? But this one is specifically to make ivermectin over the counter. It is over the counter in a great deal of the world. It has one of the safest safety profiles of any drug in the world. It has a better safety profile than Tylenol, which is over the counter. I believe that the war on COVID treatment might actually go down as one of the worst parts of this entire pandemic when it comes to the government. They have systematically created a war on COVID treatment. They are at war with doctors. They are at war with pharmacies from doing their job, which is to save people's lives.
It's not just COVID treatment. It's treatment choice. It's medical choice and medical freedom that they're at war with. And that's what they're going at war with. Because the new prohibition against off-label medication use, that affects a hell of a lot more than COVID. One of the most commonly prescribed off-label medicines in this country is Viagra. And it's generally prescribed to elderly women to help with their blood pressure because there's a really cheap generic alternative to Viagra that's prescribed to elderly women to help with their blood pressure because it's cheaper than blood pressure meds, but it does the same thing for them. It's an off-label use of the medication that's now all of a sudden banned by these new rules and regulations. But that's a decision that a patient and a doctor came to with themselves. And around the world, there's hundreds of medications that are available over the counter, not just ivermectin. We can expand upon that to look at things like birth control that's available over the counter in most civilized countries, but you need a prescription and all sorts of hoops and regulations to get it here in the United States.
It is wild. And the other thing about off-label medications that I mean, this is an issue at the federal level, but to be able to get a drug to get on label approval, it requires hundreds of millions of dollars worth of studies, and nobody's going to do that with a generic medication. So once a drug goes generic, it will never, ever, under any circumstances, have on-label approval for a different condition. Right. So, and this is a long-standing issue that has nothing to do with COVID. But what's happening right now is that we get, Anthony Fauci going out there and saying, "Oh, well, ivermectin isn't approved for COVID." Well, no kidding. It's a generic medication. It's not going to be approved for. That's absurd. It's an absurd statement.
Well, the crazy part, ivermectin is not approved for COVID. It's not approved for antiviral response. It's approved for anti-parasitic treatment, malaria, and stuff like that it was developed for. But it doesn't take into account the fact that studies have been done on its antiviral properties. It won the Nobel Prize for its antiviral properties in a study that was done on it. But that wasn't an FDA paid study.
Correct.
To get the approval. And it was after it was already generic.
Right. And it's almost impossible in the state of New Hampshire right now to get ivermectin because of the chokehold that they're putting, mostly the medical boards and the pharmaceutical boards putting on the pharmacies and the doctors. It may be that some people are stockpiling from India.
Stockpiling from India or stockpiling from Tractor Supply out in Claremont.
I like to tell people to take the human kind.
I do too. Here's the thing. I work in health insurance. I work in underwriting, and I've been involved in the medical field for a decade. And when it first came out, people talking about ivermectin, just go to Tractor Supply again. I kept telling people, don't go to fucking Tractor Supply. It's actually a different formulation and it's a different dose, and it has a really good safety profile, but that's if you're taking the right dose, not if you're taking a dose.
Taking the right dose, but then also there's different additives and fillers and veterinarian versions that are not in human versions.
It's not like insulin.
Desperation that people have been reduced to because of loss.
It's not like insulin, where the insulin for dogs and the insulin for humans is actually identical. And if you go to Walmart and you have a prescription for insulin, but you don't have insurance, they won't even put your prescription in. They'll give you the veterinary insulin and only charge you $25.
Oh, I did not know that. There you go. Learned something new.
I tried to tell people that on Twitter once, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called me a liar and tried to get me doxxed. And then I gave everyone a coupon for it, and she got mad. But I'm seeing a lot of your bills this year are in that vein. It's going beyond just the lockdown and the COVID tyranny and going more into medical freedom.
Yes.
And
medical freedom is my focus this year, 100%. What I think COVID did was bring to light how, you can control people through their health.
Yeah, and even beyond that, like you can control people through their health, you control people through their choices and their actions. And at some point, like I'm wondering at what point the government starts fighting back, because the government put up this wall and people are starting to fight back. At what point does the government strike back against those fighting for medical freedom? Like saying, okay, fine, you can have your damn medical freedom, but no public school, no public buildings, no public.
I mean, haven't some states pretty much done that? I mean, New York, you can't really walk into any building, private or public, if you don't have a vaccine passport, right?
New York has it as a matter of law, as a matter of city ordinance. And from what I've gathered, talking to people in New York and reaching out to a few people, it's the most unenforced law in the history of the city. There are people who go around New York handing out pamphlets to small business owners and restaurants and small shop owners to put up in their window that says, we don't discriminate based on gender, sex, race, or vaccination status.
Amazing.
And they have New York police officers on the beat walking around helping them distribute the flyers. And New York police officers are saying there's no way in hell they're going to enforce this. It's not worth their time. It's not worth the effort. It's not worth the paperwork. And it's, in their mind, illegal. Like it's crazy to see that the enforcement arm of the government is ignoring the government orders in some cases.
Well, I'm glad that they finally found that there was a line in the sand for them. I've been wildly disappointed over the last year and a half with law enforcement and the amount that they are willing to enforce that's unconstitutional and violates people's civil liberties. So I'm glad that there's a line for some people, and I guess that this is it. I wonder how long it'll be before New York City decides to drop their requirements, I suppose. And the other part of a lot of these bills, it's protecting people's privacy. So I think where we're going, and a lot of people do see it going with the vaccine thing, is it really about a vaccine, or is this about data collection on people? Let's say we all have to get a vaccine passport. Well, what other information is going to be stored on that? What else is the government going to require from you, therefore, in your daily life to be compliant with them? I'm unfortunately kind of intimately familiar with some of the software, and it's crazy. There is no end to it, and I absolutely do believe that a vaccination passport system will be the end of freedom. And so what we've done here, we have a lot of bills this year about the state vaccination registry system. Mm-hmm. We were the last state in the country to create a vaccine registry. Although we created one by law in 1998, and it was not actually active until January of 2021, which I think is a whole other issue. It took countless millions of dollars just to create a database that's still not even fully functioning. But
that's a very New Hampshire thing to do. And I can tell you, working in politics as a third-party candidate and working as somebody who's organized campaigns on the federal level in New Hampshire, the Secretary of State's office, I think the number is $19 million that's sitting in an account from the Help America Votes Act. That was earmarked by the federal government for the Secretary of State to update voter registration systems and roles and do electronic voter registration and update everything. But every year since that was passed in like 2009, the state legislature shut it down. So the money's just been sitting in an account untouched because it's earmarked, and the Secretary of State is still using computers from the 90s.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, so this registry system, we actually are looking to audit the New Hampshire Vaccine Association because we're unclear what's happened with a lot of this money. That's a separate issue. But the vaccine registry system in itself, the amount of data points that it tracks on somebody is a little bit alarming. It is not just like that you got, the Hep B vaccine, got, the Tdap vaccine. It's also tracking a lot about your personal life, your interpersonal relationships. It's like tracking if you refuse a vaccine.
Ooh.
Vaccine refusal. So let's say you go to your doctor and they say, "Oh, do you want the flu shot?" And you say no. That's recorded into the vaccine registry system. So it's not good. And they have made it so that it's an opt-out system. So yes, it is technically by law, it was written as a voluntary system. But this was before Article 2B of the New Hampshire State Constitution was passed, which is your right to privacy. And the DHHS chose to interpret voluntary to mean opt-out back in 1998. And I do not believe that that is constitutional anymore now that our Constitution has changed, because they make it very difficult to opt out. You have to basically know exactly what you're doing and know all the forms and who to ask and this and that to get yourself out of this system. So a big mission this year is to change the system to an opt-in system. You must actively choose to participate in this system if you want to be, because it tracks some pretty scary data points.
And that's terrifying for somebody to meet like me, because I operate my life on the mentality of like, I avoid anything that's an unnecessary medical treatment or course of treatment or alteration. And in the past, I've taken that to mean things like, no, I won't take pharmaceutical antidepressants to treat PTSD. No, I won't take the flu shot every year because I don't need it. I haven't taken the flu shot since I got out of the Army, where I didn't have a choice. It was forced on me every single year, or it would be a negative mark on my career and I couldn't get promoted without the flu shot. I look at things like, there's a lot of research out there coming from Israel and Sweden and France and other countries that shows that natural immunity is stronger than the vaccines, that they're not seeing any cases of reinfection, but they're seeing a lot of cases of breakthrough infection for vaccinated people. Right. And someone like me who I didn't get sick. The worst was I felt like I couldn't taste my vape or a soda for like a day or two and had a diminished sense of taste, but I didn't get sick at all. Other friends around me got pretty sick, fevers, coughs, really bad things, but I didn't get sick at all. I didn't get tested at the time. When I went for a annual visit at the VA to have some checkup on things from my time in the military, a blood test showed that I had antibodies.
Right.
For COVID. So I was infected with COVID, got over it, and have the antibodies and a natural immunity. To me, I'm not a science denier. I'm not a kook conspiracy theorist guy. I'm not one of the people who thinks the vaccine is full of microchips and tracking and there to sterilize the population. It's just unnecessary.
Right.
To me.
There's
and I don't
been a vaccine in like the history of science that outperforms natural immunity. The fact that we have our government telling us or trying to not say it, because of course they know that it's not true, but like make it appear as if that's not suddenly the case with this vaccine. This is like the first one that outperforms natural. I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely insane. And frankly, it doesn't matter what your justification is for getting or not getting. It is no one's business. Everyone has their own right to conscience. They have their own beliefs, their own way of thinking, and we all have the right to make our own choices for our own body. There is nothing more fundamental a right to liberty than your right to govern your own body.
Right. So a lot of people argue that libertarianism is rooted in property rights. And I like to argue that property rights are just an extension of self-ownership, and that self-ownership is the root of all rights, all human liberty. And the most illogical extension of like government's role being to protect life, liberty, and property is the government telling you that you don't have the right to decide what to do with your property or with your body or with your own self. It's asinine. It drives me insane.
Life, liberty, and property. Which two came first? Life and liberty came before property.
Right.
And life was number one, right? So you can't, I actually argue that telling someone that they must get any medical intervention, I don't really care what it is. There is no such thing as a medical intervention without risk. I think the courts have decided that the only medical intervention that can be forced upon somebody like against their will is like a urine test or a saliva test, because those ones don't really have any type of risk, correct?
Right.
But any other intervention poses some level of risk. And so I, as a follower of the non-aggression principle, say that it is an act of violence to tell someone they must get any medical intervention because there is inherent risk to that medical intervention.
And even if there was no inherent risk to it, it's still a matter of personal choice. Fundamentally, it's a matter of personal choice. I take this a lot farther than a lot of people want to do. When I talk about medical freedom, I'll argue that it goes all the way up to the point of a decision to die, and death with dignity. And the legalization of death with dignity is something that I want to see in my lifetime, where people who are diagnosed with a terminal illness can opt instead of spending the next 4 years of their life miserably going through chemotherapy and trying to fight an inevitable disease in absolute misery and pain, can choose to get their affairs in order and go out peacefully. Like, to me, that's something.
I'm going to say something that's going to get me into a lot of trouble, because this does go against the Republican Party platform. But I actually agree with you. I think that some people think that that's a sin, and for them, they don't have to do that, because for them, that's a sin, right? But if you don't believe that it's a sin, then it's not the government's job to interfere and say and enforce their own beliefs upon you.
Right. And I hate the fact that it's the big problem I see here that COVID has brought out with medical tyranny. And the big difference in what we're fighting against government medical tyranny is that I don't think we're actually still fighting government medical tyranny. It's to the point where it's become a war of culture, because the government is acting in response to a popular demand. And to me, this is one of the biggest problems with democracy in general. I'm a Hoppian. I argue that democracy is the worst system of government, except for all the others. But when you have democracy, it's inherently majority mob rule, that 51 people can tell 49 people how their life is going to be run. And to me, that is the antithesis of liberty. And what we're seeing now is a government that is responsive to democracy, a government that's seeing that 59% of the state is vaccinated, and 59% want everyone to be vaccinated. So the other 41% have to get vaccinated. They don't have a choice about it. And it's no longer a matter of we're fighting the government, but we're fighting our neighbors. And to me, that is terrifying.
Yes, but what created that? I mean, to me,
it's the fear, the propaganda
itself. It arose through a very well-constructed plan of fear propagated by the government and by pharma-owned media. And I think that that's what created it. I don't think that people kind of got there on their own. They really got there because of the government.
Yeah, but it's absolutely wild, because I think at the utter root of medical freedom is, and the choice of what to put into your body, and the choice of what kind of treatment you want to get to. And this is going to be a hard segue into one of your another bill you're co-sponsoring that I think is fascinating, and it blows my mind that I think this one is going to pass by a mile. I think this one is going to see massive popular support in favor of it by the same people who are demanding mandatory vaccinations, and that's the constitutional amendment to legalize cannabis in New Hampshire.
Yes.
Because it's the same argument,
isn't it? Yeah.
It's the same argument in favor of legalizing cannabis as opposing vaccine mandates. It's that the government has no right to tell you what you can put in your body.
That's right. Okay, so I'm going to be totally honest. I have never, and I'm not, can I swear on this? Can I swear?
Absolutely.
I am not bullshitting. I have never consumed cannabis in any way at all, ever in my entire life. That's my personal choice. That has nothing to do with anybody else's personal choice to use cannabis. And it's the same thing with the vaccine.
Right. I have used cannabis in the past. I am not a fan of cannabis. I dislike it. I think a lot of people abuse it, and it leads to detrimental effects in their personal life and how they use it and in their career. But it's not my choice to tell them they can't do it.
That's right. Yeah. I totally agree.
Like, there are other drugs that are illegal that I think have immense and incredible positive benefits for the people that use them, that should be legalized alongside cannabis, but they don't have the popular support for them yet to do something with this kind of a push. I hope that you set a precedent. I hope that this constitutional amendment in New Hampshire sets a precedent to piggyback off. Well, if cannabis is legal, why isn't psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA? There's actual clinical trials being done with these three drugs, and it's LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine 4 Schedule II drugs that are, or 2 of them are Schedule 1, 2 are Schedule 2, that are hyper-regulated, hyper-illegal, yet in Boston, only an hour south, they're doing clinical trials using them to treat PTSD, depression, chronic depressive disorder, all sorts of mental health issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard amazing things. I consider that to all be totally part of medical freedom. Your choices about what medications you get and take are between you and your healthcare providers of your choice. So there you go. And being able to choose your healthcare provider is part of it, and having healthcare providers be able to give their actual medical opinions instead of like the government propagated medical opinions is, I think, another thing that we'll have to go into as well. But just so that people are clear about why this is a constitutional amendment. So it's not a mystery that Governor Sununu doesn't like drugs. Okay, he likely will never sign like a cannabis legalization bill, and but constitutional amendments do not have anything to do with the governor. Governors cannot stop constitutional amendments. They have to get passed by 60% of the House and the Senate, and then they go to ballots. So the people then choose.
And they're the only thing that goes to the ballot in New Hampshire. I know I have a lot of listeners and viewers from outside of New Hampshire, people in Massachusetts, California, other states, and even Maine. Like, we're surrounded. It's not normal to not have the ability for people to petition things onto the ballot directly. That's something that's pretty uniquely New Hampshire, where you have a check on citizen initiative at the legislative level. But even the legislature, there's only 2 things they can put on the ballot: a constitutional amendment or a call for a constitutional convention. Right. And an open call for a constitutional convention can be terrifying and dangerous. So, but like constitutional amendments, we've seen things passed in recent years. It was just 4 years ago where we got a constitutional amendment increasing privacy rights. We got a constitutional amendment giving every taxpayer in the state of New Hampshire standing to sue the government over government abuse and government overreach. Yeah. Things like that we see the legislature doing, and those are massive libertarian wins that people don't talk about. But in other states that have the initiative referendum process, like Massachusetts had yes on question 4. They put it on the ballot, and 82% of the states said yes, legalize weed now, because the legislature was taking too long. Colorado,
I've only ever voted in New Hampshire. I am like born and bred here, and I always, when I drive into other states and see like the signs of, what are they talking about? Now, I think the reason why New Hampshire doesn't do things like that, I'm going to take a guess, but the reason why is because we have a citizen legislature. So we have a 400-person House of Representatives, and literally you have a rep. You can spit in New Hampshire and hit a rep. Okay, we are incredibly accessible. We are not living in an ivory tower. I don't have a staff. I'm the only person who answers my emails. When you call me, you're calling my cell phone number. So you have all the access to me. You can, come to our committee meetings really easily and scream at us. It's just, we're very, so I would say that's probably why we don't do that. Do you agree?
Well, I think it comes down to like the New Hampshire Constitution is the oldest constitution in the country. Right. New Hampshire ratified its constitution. Massachusetts, a few months later, ratified its own. And then the federal constitution was drafted using those two as a guideline for how to draft a constitution, which is fascinating history. But initiative referendum processes were all passed as amendments to other state constitutions, and New Hampshire's just never done it. And I think New Hampshire citizens never felt the need to do it because legislators were so accessible. And the few times they've tried to do it, I know in 2018, there was a bill to create a citizen initiative referendum process that died in the Senate. And the Senate is unfortunately not nearly as accessible as the House in New Hampshire.
Accessible and liberty forward. The House, especially this year, this is the largest liberty contingency we ever had in the House, but we have some work to do at the Senate.
Yeah, it's a really strange dichotomy where people run for state rep in New Hampshire on a budget of $40 and win. People run for state senator in New Hampshire on a budget of $400,000 and lose.
Yeah. Did you see the pharma money stuff that came out today?
I have not.
Okay, so somebody is going through the numbers of the state senators and how much money they've received from pharma. And it is crazy amounts of money. There are senators who are getting way more money from pharma than even the governor does. So
it's asinine in my look, because pharma is the second biggest contributor to Governor Sununu historically, well before COVID, well before any of this. It's always been pharma.
Check out Chuck Morse and his and Jeff Bradley. Yeah, and the Republicans are getting a lot more from pharma than the Democrats are, as far as I can tell so far. Anyway,
they're the ones who aren't automatically in the bag. They're the ones who need to be bought.
Yes, it's very interesting. And so down in Texas, the governor called them into special session, or the legislature into special session, for the purpose of dealing with the vaccine issue. And they could not pass a single bill because Pfizer stepped in and started threatening all of them. Basically, this is what I'm hearing from folks who are working down there on this. Pfizer stepped in and started threatening them, saying, "We will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars primarying you if you pass any bill," So then when people say that, this is somehow a capitalism issue, I'm like, no, pharma is the truest example of crony capitalism that exists in our time. And libertarians should be fighting against crony capitalism as much as they fight against government, itself, right, their overreach, because it's the same thing.
Yeah, the cronyism really, again, one of the reasons that I was against getting the vaccine, even before I knew I had antibodies, before I knew I had a natural immunity, was the cronyism that went into its immediate approval and how quickly it was approved. And I know this sounds kind of hypocritical as a libertarian who openly says we should abolish the FDA and let the market decide. But the market didn't decide this. That's nor right. Did the FDA decide this. This was right. Decided by cronyists in the executive branch. And the key to me that really stuck out was, if you look at the history of Moderna as a company, 2 years ago, it was a small hobbyist research firm that was still doing grants and still doing IPOs and still trying to get investor money to keep them afloat, because they'd only existed for 10 years. They had never had a successful clinical trial. They had never had a successful research project. They had never brought anything to market. They were just doing research for research's sake. And if you looked at their website and their staff, it was a bunch of retired professors, people who were researching for research's sake because it was a hobby and they were interested and were just getting funding from investors to fund their hobby, pretty much. And then the chairman of their board of directors got hired by Donald Trump to head Project Warp Speed, the private-public funding partnership to develop a vaccine. And he dumped $13 billion into Moderna. And now they're one of the largest, biggest hiring employers in the state of Massachusetts and in all of New England. And their stock price went from $13 to $480 in the course of a year. And the chairman of the board, Elizabeth Warren, actually called him out on this. I never thought I'd agree with Elizabeth Warren on anything. She's a genuinely despicable human being, in my opinion. But she called out the chairman of the board of Moderna and the chairman of Project Warp Speed, asking why he didn't divest his stock from Moderna before dumping $13 billion of taxpayer money into Moderna.
Listen, I completely and totally agree. And see, these are all very legitimate concerns and very legitimate questions to be asking. And yet, if you dare to question or to, frankly, just know a hell of a lot more about the process than most people do, then you're automatically marginalized as an anti-vaxxer right now. And this is a serious cultural issue that we have. And I actually don't think it's just cultural. I mean, the media in particular really loves to feed into that narrative. The moment you ask any questions, you are marginalized. And well, frankly, they're in on it. They're mostly funded by pharma too. So
don't remember, I used to joke that when I was running for office, I don't care who wrote the check, I would take their money, but I wouldn't answer to them. If they really supported what I was doing, I'd be happy to take their money, because people have complained when I published my FEC reports when I ran for Senate. I had somebody complain and freak out. "Oh my God, you took money from a Nazi." I'm like, really? Who? I didn't know who they were talking about, but one of my donors who had donated a few $100s was apparently an avowed white supremacist. I'm like, I've never heard of him. Like, they donated on the website, they never called, and I never asked them for money. I'll take money from anybody. The difference is, these pharma companies are sending reps into the senators' offices and saying, we'll give you this money contingent on doing this.
That's right. That's right. Or as in what happened in Texas, they were threatening to primary them to get them out of office. And there is nothing, I want to make it very clear to your audience. Politicians, and I am not one of them, okay? But politicians are only motivated by three things. And one of them is not money. Because guess what? All your New Hampshire state reps, they get $100 a year. There's no money in this, okay? But they are motivated by three things: election, re-election, and election to higher office.
I think the only real benefit to being a New Hampshire state rep is the free tolls with that license plate. But on the flip side, it makes you very identifiable. I've been cut off by somebody with New Hampshire rep plates before and went out of my way to follow them for another exit so I could write down the plate, figure out what seat they had, and figure out who it was, just to send a mean tweet back at them when I got home, because it does make them identifiable.
Some won't put the plates on for that reason. They hold the plate so you can actually keep them in your car, go up to the toll booth and show them, and you still get your free toll.
Right. But I mean, what is it? It's $100 a year and free tolls.
Yep.
Like, Ian, if you were to break that down hourly, how many pennies an hour do you get paid to work in the legislature?
Yeah, I'm working way too much for that. But, with the advantage to it, and some people argue, we should pay them more because then, they'll stick around longer. No, I don't want them to stick around longer, number one. Okay. Number two, we're doing it because we really want to do it. Now, there are some people who are doing it because they really like the power of it and they see something higher for themselves in the future, right? There are definitely some reps in that category, but for the most part in New Hampshire state reps are doing this because they really want to. They kind of believe in it. Now, they may not have the same beliefs as you, but overall they really believe in the work. So.
And I understand both sides of that debate. And it's one of the problems I have with the current system is that New Hampshire has the oldest legislature in the country on average. Yep. Because unfortunately, it's an unpaid position with a massive time commitment. And a lot of people cannot afford to take the time out of the work to provide for their families to do such a thing. So we end up with a lot of people who are retired, running for office and staying in office for years. And some of them are great. Some of them are not so great. Across the board, they're generally disconnected from the people that they represent, because the average age of a New Hampshire voter is, I think, 30 years younger than the average age of a New Hampshire rep.
True. That's true. No, we get a lot of retired folks. And, some people like me, but again,
or students
continue doing this. I got a little kid and it's a lot, right? I got a job and a kid, and I'm trying to juggle all of that is a lot, right?
Right. Or even younger, like there is a lot of people who are just students because they have the time because they're students who can afford the time off. And I know there was a big problem actually at the beginning of the lockdown. There was a huge controversy over a state rep who was forced to resign. Mm-hmm. Because he couldn't make the commute from California to Concord because he actually lived in California. And once the college dorms were closed, he had to go back to home and do classes remotely.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's been, I've heard tell of some professors in the political science program at St. Anselm's and Keene State and a few other colleges that actually give credit for running for State House as the part of the political science program.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. So it incentivizes students to run for office, and
there aren't that many students, honestly.
Right. There have been a lot more in the past.
Yeah, right now I only know of one. I think just one. Yeah. But there are. I mean, I don't really know. Because we haven't been in person a lot, I haven't really gotten a chance to meet a lot of the Democrats, honestly. So I don't really know any of the Democrats. But with the Republicans, I think we have the largest amount of young Republicans that would be under 40 that we've had in the House in a long time, maybe ever. I don't know, but we actually have a lot more. But it's a serious issue because there's not a lot of money, not a lot of time. Sometimes people just have, interesting jobs where they are very flexible and they can do different things. Like we have a lot of real estate agents.
Yeah, that's the thing. Absolutely. Mark Warden's a good friend of mine. I love
That's
him.
right.
But he's one of the most consistent people I've ever met when it comes to his voting record and his tenure in the state house too.
Always.
And,
yep.
Like on the ball, and I've never had a question about anything he's done. Like, and even like the Liberty reps in New Hampshire, even though there is a block of Liberty Republicans and Libertarians and Free Staters, it's still a pretty diverse group, and it's not always lockstep within that group on major issues. And I've had a lot of disagreements with Liberty reps. Like last year, there was a bill I got in a yelling match with Herschel Nunez about because me and Herschel were on different sides of it and disagreed with it.
I might know which one it is. But yeah, no, listen, that's because we actually think for ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Unlike the monolith that is the Democratic Party, where if you step out of line, you're booted. And I think the greatest example of that is actually a former state rep I knew, Joseph Stalkop. He was a student at Keene State. He was elected as a Democrat, and he took a trip out to Standing Rock during the whole protest about the pipeline being built through Standing Rock to join the protests. And he saw the violence that a private company and the state were willing to employ against protesters and the water protectors and the Native American tribe to get that pipeline built. And he came back and he gave a talk on the House floor about like he could no longer support gun control bills because he's realized how important it is for people to be armed to defend themselves. And the Democratic Party immediately pulled him from this committee.
That sounds right. Yeah, but listen, Jason Osborne is the majority leader. He has to herd all the cats, man. Sometimes I don't envy his position at all, especially such a narrow majority. He's gonna herd all of the cats, even within the Freedom Caucus. Like, we have to be very specific about the things that we choose to take on because we don't necessarily agree on everything.
Right. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful is like, if you get a whole bunch of people that disagree on things together and tell them they have to find the things that they actually agree on, you're going to find the big things. You're going to find the important things. You're going to find the things that there is popular consensus and support for. And you're going to end up pushing aside the things that there is no consensus for. And there's no sense in moving forward with something if there's no clear approach on the principles of it. So by having a group of independently minded people who can think and rationalize and argue with each other about the merits of a particular course of action, you're going to end up weeding out the bad courses of action, or even just the disagreeable courses of action that don't have unanimous buy-in.
We debate amongst each other a lot.
I mean, I think that's just a libertarian thing. If you told people that you couldn't debate with friends, the libertarian movement would collapse overnight. But all right, so we've gone over your bills. I am super excited to see a lot of your bills go through. I know I plan on spending a lot of time testifying this year with my new role, especially on healthcare related things.
Great. Well,
but you're also speaking at Liberty Forum this year coming up. And as a freshman rep, you've made the waves to get noticed and become a kind of big enough nuisance that you have to be taken seriously. And I'm excited. Liberty Forum is going to be great for anybody watching who's unfamiliar with it. The New Hampshire Liberty Forum is one of the largest gatherings of libertarians outside of Porkfest. It happens in New England every year. It's put on by the Free State Project, and liberty-leaning legislators like Melissa and Mark and other people come to speak, as well as we got a lot of surprises in store for Liberty Forum this year. And if you're watching, you should go to nhlibertyforum.com and get your tickets now for the first weekend in March.
Okay. Yes, I will be there. I haven't figured out exactly what I'm going to talk about, but
those are the worst. I've been asked to speak at things before and not figured out what I was going to say until I showed up. And
I can't do that. I'm not
like that. We have a small little Toastmasters group type of a thing in Manchester where people come to practice public speaking. We don't call it Toastmasters because I think they're trademarked and copyrighted, and we don't want to pay their fees and fines. But I gave a talk the other night about how preparation is a crutch. Like, I do much better on the fly, unprepared. And at the end of it, somebody's like, you didn't say a single time in 5 minutes and you just flowed. I'm like, yeah, preparation's a crutch. Just go with it. If you're passionate about what you're speaking about, speak with passion and people will listen. And that's what I advise people. But hey, it's not going to work for everybody. Melissa, where can people follow you and learn more about what you're doing?
I'm very unfollowable.
I know it was hard for me to find you because you're not on social media.
I'm like, really, I don't like social media. Okay, so you can please sign up for our email list at rebuildnh.com. We send out email updates about all of the intricacies of the going on of liberty issues in New Hampshire, and so you can. I help write the email if you're getting me there. You can also contact me through director@rebuildnh.com or melissa.blasek@leg.state.nh.us. You can find me on the GenCourt website, all of my contact information there.
It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, Melissa. This is a great conversation. I'm looking forward to your agenda, making its way through the State House, looking forward to watching it, and looking forward to hearing from you at Liberty Forum. Whatever you do decide to talk about, I'll be there.
All right. Sounds great.
Everyone watching, until next time, you do your best to stay free. Thanks again for tuning in and joining us tonight. Make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that big red subscribe button on YouTube and turn on notifications to get alerted every time we go live. If you enjoyed this content, you can join our production team on Patreon by following the link in the description. And don't forget to follow on social media and join our community Discord channel by following the links in the description as well. The best part of all of this is the community that we're building and growing. So go ahead and join us. And thanks once again to our awesome sponsors and patrons for making all of this possible. And if you can't catch the show live, you can always catch it the next day on YouTube, Odyssey, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts. So until next time, everybody, be free.